Hello, I'm Melinda Taylor. I'm on the faculty of the University of Texas School of Law, and I'm part of the Mitchell Foundation's Respect Big Bend team. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you today about our Respect Big Bend program, and so honored to be able to present along with the other recipients of the Texan by Nature Conservation Wrangler recognition. We so appreciate being recognized as a Conservation Wrangler. So I'm going to talk to you today about Respect Big Bend, which is an initiative that the Mitchell Foundation launched a couple of years ago to empower communities to participate in decisions about energy siting in Texas. First part of my presentation, I'll just tell you a little bit about RBB, why the foundation started the project, and then I'll talk in a bit more detail about what Respect Big Bend is, including the development by design framework that we use in the project. And I'll focus even more on our stakeholder and community engagement efforts, which are really the heart and soul of our project. So, as I've mentioned, the Cynthia George Mitchell Foundation initiated Respect Big Bend and have funded a great deal of the work of RBB. Mr. Mitchell was a leader in the oil and gas industry in Texas. He pioneered the combined use of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracking to enable a lot of oil and gas in very tight shale formations to be commercially produced. And he was also a very committed sustainability and conservation advocate. So this project and other work that's funded by the Mitchell Foundation is a reflection of his commitment and Mrs. Mitchell's commitment to sustainability. So in Texas, we have a lot of big open spaces, especially in West Texas, iconic, beautiful places that people not from Texas assume look like the rest of Texas. And we know that that's not the case. These places are increasingly rare across our state, but in West Texas, they still dominate the landscape. A few years ago, the Mitchell Foundation recognized that even these beautiful, out of the way, remote locations with all this unique biodiversity and other values could potentially be impacted by energy development down the road. Energy is a vitally important industry to our state. We're the largest oil and gas producer in the country. We're also the largest wind energy producer in the country, and our solar sector is growing dramatically. Nobody expects that to change, but as we continue to produce more and more energy in Texas, there's more and more of a threat to these iconic places. And just an importance in making sure that if and when energy is developed, in these far reaches of our state, it's done so in a way that respects the community's values and minimizes any of the negative impacts that can come with energy development. We focused on the Trans-Pecos Ecoregion, the area west of the Pecos River, which contains some very diverse landscapes, everything from desert grasslands to scrublands to high elevation mountain habitat, sky islands that provide important habitat for species you don't find anywhere else in our state, like black bear or mountain lions. It's also a region that's important for the dark skies that are found out in West Texas. I'm sure most of you are aware that the McDonald Observatory, which is part of the University of Texas system, is in the Davis Mountains, just uphill from Fort Davis. And it contains some of the darkest skies in North America. And as a result, it's a destination place for researchers, astronomers from all over the world who go there to use the telescopes and the system, the research system there. The communities of West Texas, Fort Davis and Alpine and Marfa, are all unique. They have their own personalities. They are tourist destinations. They're places where visitors from all over Texas and people from outside Texas go to experience the great outdoors, or go to hear live music, or see art, or film movies. There have been a number of sort of famous movies filmed in and around Marfa, especially with Giant and No Country for Old Men and others. they're unique places. They've been kind of isolated from the energy development that's occurred at a more intense pace up in the Permian Basin to their northeast. But again, some of the residents of these communities have been concerned about the potential for energy development to come their way in the future. The Mitchell Foundation commissioned some public opinion research before we put the RBB project together. And without going into a lot of the details of that research, the big takeaways for us were that, first of all, the residents of Texas, including far west Texas, um, respect the energy industry, understand how important energy is to our state economy, and they welcome development in a broad sense in our state. On the other hand, residents are aware of and concerned about potential negative impacts that can accompany energy development, damage to infrastructure, the potential for water contamination, crime, which they associate with an influx of workers or people, just the population growing in an area, and price inflation. That's a phenomena, of course, that Midland and Odessa experienced, and Pecos and other towns in West Texas during the recent oil boom, with the price of hotel rooms skyrocketing, housing going up, and the like. And residents are concerned about that, and they raise those concerns. So the RBB project was put together really to try to give the stakeholders, the community members in West Texas, a vantage point or a platform from which they could first articulate what's most important to them about their region, and then also provide input to the energy sector if and when energy development speeds up and potentially, in fact, impacts their region. So the foundation funded a variety of organizations with strong science and technical expertise, as well as skills with communications and public opinion research and outreach skills to policymakers and the like. And we obtained some very important funding as well from other foundations, the Meadows Foundation, the Permian Basin Area Foundation, the King Foundation, and the Stillwater Foundation. We're very grateful to all of those funders for their support. The group developed a mission statement, which again reflects that balance that I keep talking about, that recognition that responsible energy development is something to be encouraged in Texas. But it's also important for stakeholders to have an opportunity to articulate the things about their region that they hold most dear and provide input to decision making about energy development. Our study area was the 18 county area that's outlined here in black. It's the Trans-Pecos region, essentially. It includes the Permian Basin, so our research included the areas that are kind of in the heart of the Permian, as well as these areas of far west Texas, the Tri-County area, where there's been very little energy development to date. The stakeholder advisory group that we put together, though, all comes from the Tri-County area, from Presidio, Brewster, and Jeff Davis counties. We know and have always known since we started this project how important it is to engage the community. And in addition to just getting the best information possible about what resources, what aspects of their communities are most important to the residents there, it's a way to build buy-in to the process and to the outcomes of the process, so that what we produce through this project won't be a report that just goes on somebody's shelf and gathers dust over time, but actually is a living tool that these communities and others can avail themselves of going forward. So we put together a stakeholder advisory group early on with representatives that are landowners and mineral owners, representatives from the oil and gas industry, as well as the renewable sector, conservation organizations and state agencies, Texas Parks and Wildlife in particular, and then community members who were not large landowners, but people who county commissioner, for example, a minister, a business owner, others who live in these communities and care about their long-term sustainability and desirability. The Stakeholder Advisory Group defined its roles and responsibilities, and which I've listed here. Note that we have worked throughout from the very beginning to minimize politics in these discussions. This isn't about promoting one type of energy over another or anything like that. This is meant to be as constructive a process as possible, and we have wanted our SAG members to speak freely and share their thoughts and perspectives and objections when they have them as we go through the process. We also held a series of landowner workshops with people outside the SAG to educate them about what we were doing, and a seminar series, which initially was live and eventually had to be converted to Zoom, unfortunately, but had good attendance at those events. So, having gathered lots of information from our stakeholder advisory group and other members of the public, we launched the Development by Design framework, which involves the steps that are described or listed here on this slide. And the first of those steps is to develop a conservation vision for the region. So our SAG spent quite a bit of time talking about those attributes of the Tri-County area that they care most about and that they want to protect going forward. This is three of the conservation values that they identified. There were 3 or 4 others, but the ranching heritage and private property rights is sort of the umbrella under which everything else falls, because all the members of the SAG, whether they were landowners or not, said over and over again how important it was to preserve large, intact ranches, because those are the places where the other values that the communities enjoy come from. This is a part of, Texas is 95% privately owned, and that applies just as much in West Texas as anywhere else, despite the existence of Big Bend National Park and a couple of other parks out there. Still, a lot of the important places are found on private lands. Then we took the information we had gleaned from the SAG and represented those values through spatially on these maps. And this was a pretty involved process that was led by the Nature Conservancy, very interesting process that resulted in a cumulative values map that I'm showing you here. And without going into a lot of detail about this, suffice it to say that the more green an area is, the more values are associated with that area. So it's those areas are valued for habitat, for ranching heritage, for dark skies, et cetera. So you can see that the Tri-County area where our SAG came from is sort of disproportionately green, or there is a lot of important conservation areas in that Tri-County area. We also projected future energy development. So both oil and gas, this is actually a map of previous oil and gas development in the Tri-County area, but we made projections looking forward, and you're not expected to read the numbers on that table, but the Bureau of Economic Geology led this work, and they estimated, based on the geology of the region, the wind speeds and sort of wind resources, as well as the solar radiation and the slope of the areas, how many acres were potentially suitable for various types of energy development. That was their contribution to the project. So again, going back to this development by design, there was the creation of a conservation vision, projection of energy, future energy development, and then the place where those two factors overlap, where there might be development, for example, in a place that has a high conservation value, those places are identified as areas of potential impact, where mitigation would be appropriate, avoidance or mitigation. We're currently in the process of finalizing our report with the Stakeholder Advisory Group. It was presented to the SAG last week at the most recent Stakeholder Advisory Group meeting, and we'll be unveiling that and kind of rolling it out to the community and to the state at large over the next few weeks. We've had a very high level of engagement throughout this process from the SAG members as well as other members of the community at those landowner workshops and the seminar series. So we feel really good about where we are with this process. I think it's been enormously rewarding to work with the Stakeholder Advisory Group and to hear their perspective about what's most important to them in their region. So I think the big takeaways for us are that we've developed a decision framework through this development by design process that certainly could be developed in other parts of the state where there's either ongoing or the potential for new energy development. It's also a tool that can be used to prioritize areas for restoration, whether that's to connect areas that are currently fragmented from a habitat standpoint, or to improve habitat for species or improve water quality, whatever the objective is. This type of spatial tool, I think, can be very useful. The fact that the process was driven by the stakeholders and reflects their values and what they hold most important, I think is going to result in a product that has a long shelf life. And we hope to be able to use the product to help individual landowners in the future and contribute to decisions about energy siting that the energy companies themselves are engaged in. In Texas, there's not a regulatory process through which stakeholders have a say about energy siting, and that's a choice that policymakers have made. But we think through this sort of cooperative knowledge sharing initiative that again is driven by the people who are going to be affected by energy development, we can give them a voice going forward. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you all today and look forward to your questions in the Q&A section.